Visual cues help us to quickly retrieve and remember information. When my sister was young, she had this book called Yo Sacramento, and it has silly images to help you remember state capitals. The images made learning fun and easy. The visual cues were all you needed to remember all the state capitals. I mean, 25 years later, and I can still picture the huge hamster riding on a Concorde airplane. And if you know the book, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When I started teaching math, I wanted to use the same concept to help my students remember all the concepts we learned throughout the year. This is what I came up with, and I want to share it with you. Welcome to the Teacher Revolution, where I give you tips and tricks to continue to grow as an educator. I'm Cindy, I'm a counselor and a teacher coach. Before I share how I use visual cues to help students remember math concepts, make sure to check out the description below for my mini course, Online Teaching Bootcamp, where I cover how to lesson plan, how to boost student engagement, how to check for understanding effectively, and how to differentiate. There are so many awesome visual cues that we can use in language arts to help students remember letter sounds like this M for mountain, or to help them read this picture that gives context to the meaning of the word, or to help them remember which way a letter should go. So when I started teaching, I wanted easy visual cues to help my students remember the silly stories I told them that made an abstract idea make more sense. And more importantly, I wanted them to be able to remember the skill long term. Throughout the school year, my students accumulated about 30 images to help them remember the different mathematical skills that we had covered. Make sure to stick to the end of this video to learn how you can get access to all the visual cues and the videos on how I taught each skill. Here's a sample of 7 visual cues I used while teaching in middle school. Multiplying polynomials. Now, usually when we teach multiplying polynomials, most people just go with the FOIL method, which works. But for some students who are not able to do that FOIL method, I found that using the square method really helped them, and we had this dash in the middle just to remind them to combine like terms. And now with this method, it worked for my students that really struggled with math, because it kind of let them remember that they were supposed to multiply for each little square. And so I would draw it out for my students who, needed some differentiated instruction, the ones that I knew that were struggling. I would just draw it for them. And then most students, where they got stuck is with the combining like terms, but they were able to remember that they were supposed to multiply to get the answer. And that made it super easy for them, and we were able to get the answer right away. And it works for multiplying trinomials also, so any number of polynomials will work here too. Adding and subtracting integers. Now, adding and subtracting integers always confused my students, and I tried so many different ways to be able to teach this. I tried thinking like a football analogy with loss of yardage. I tried thinking of teams, things like that. It just did not stick. I would work for some students, but not all. But I found that this visual cue and this method worked wonders. So negative numbers on one side of this T-chart and positives on the other. When they were on opposite sides, you subtract. So negative 7 plus 5, we would just say 7 minus 5, which is 2. And then the question would always be, what is there more of? And in this case, there's more negatives. So students would just draw this visual cue right onto their paper every time, or I would draw it for them, and it would help them remember what to do. Multiplying and dividing integers. Just the integers itself, there's rules for adding and subtracting, rules for multiplying and dividing. No wonder they get so stuck in trying to remember. So our visual cue for this one is this triangle, and the reason why it's this triangle is, watch this video. So the video explains how to use it. And the cool thing is that I had students that would draw the visual cue and they would actually use their fingers to help them. And some didn't need to use their fingers. They could just, imagine in their head what to do. So what was great was that students would have both of these visual cues on their paper so that they remembered that there's different rules for adding and subtracting and then multiplying and dividing integers, and they had the two rules what to do, because that's the biggest hurdle, is that you have to remember that there's different rules for different games, and this one definitely helped them remember that. Types of slopes. Now, just graphing in general, just students have a hard time because there's nothing that you can actually show them that shows them types of slopes. But what we use is what we called a slope tree, and we would draw the slope tree every single time when we were talking about slope, so that they would remember that the negative was on the left side, the positive on the right, and then the way that the line went. Now, when I introduced positive and negatives, because you can know what type of slope you have by just looking at the line, right? So we would look at it as money, and I'd say, look at this company, it's, positively, it's making money, it's growing, and then this company is losing money, it's a negative. The only thing is you have to be careful and make sure that your students are drawing that arrow on the right side of that line, or it can get confusing. But this was one way to introduce, positive and negative slopes, helping them remember, and then using that slope tree also helped a lot. Now, when it came to lines that were vertical, we had our visual cue, and this one worked great because from this line, we would just put no for no slope, and you can also make the letter U for undefined. And they would draw that in their notes so they remembered how to, what it looked like, and they can draw it. And then for a horizontal line, they would draw the letter Z for 0. And we also watched this video. Dividing fractions. Now, fractions in general are just so fun for me to teach because I have tons of little stories for the students to help them remember the different rules for fractions and what it means and what it looks like, and it helps them remember the story. For dividing fractions, we have the KFC guy on a skateboard, and the reason we have that is because I show him this. Now, the video is a visual cue to remind them that they have to change that division sign. In the video, it changes into a skateboard, but obviously they know it just needs to change, and it's going to change into a multiplication sign. Now, if you want a copy of the video, if you go into the description, there'll be a link on how you can get all of the videos that I showed my students, along with how I use the visual cue when I taught it. So that's all in the link below, and you have access to that. System of equations. For system of equations, this visual cue is more of remembering whether you have many or no solutions. And so in this case, if the A and B cross out, we would make an N to remind ourselves that this is a no solution. And then when all three of them would cancel out, we would draw an M to remind us that this is many solutions. Now, okay, next we have solving multi-step equations. Now, this visual cue was ridiculously awesome. And the reason why it worked is because I didn't wait until we were solving multi-step equations to introduce it. I started using it straight from when we started learning one-step equations, like 3x equals 6. Except that I didn't have all the parts already. All I had was undue coefficient. And as we move forward, then we would add the different parts of this visual cue. And so we were building on it and we were using the language over and over. So by the time we got to multi-step equations, they were experts on that. So let me show you how this works. So the D at the top of our pyramid is for distribute. So we have to distribute, and I have a really cute video that I have for my students to remember what does it mean to distribute, because students will distribute to the first number and then they forget everything else. And so the video reminds them of what to do when they have to distribute. The next one is combine like terms, and we just would use this language over and over. Every time that we were going to solve equations, we were using this language. Next, we have move variable, move constant. Now, for my students, I made them actually show me where they were moving it. I would make sure that they lined up their equal sign, because then it gets sloppy and it gets lost. And I showed them. Now, if you'd rather have your students do it right underneath, that's fine. We can have our 4x equals 12. And then the last one, undo the coefficient. And so, again, we just practice that language over and over so that they had it. And if they forgot what it meant, where to start with solving the equation, I would tell them draw the pyramid, and they were like, yes, distribute first. That's where I need to go first, because they remembered and we practiced it over and over. So it's more about what do I do first, and then I can take it from there. Sometimes they messed up the math, but what I care is the process. Do you know the process? And through this, they were able to get to that. So if you want to get all of my visual cues and how I taught the actual process, check out the link below to get to the link of where I have all of those. I encourage you to start thinking of visual cues that you can incorporate into your math lesson to help your students remember skills that will make them successful. Are you ready for a free one-on-one session with me to discuss strategies to teach math or anything you need advice on? Head over to my website at cindyrosa.com for information. Remember to hit that like button if you learned something from this video. If you're interested in getting access to all my math visual cues and short video clips on how I taught the skill, check out the link below for the information on how you can get that. And leave any questions you have in the comments section. I hope you found this information helpful, and thanks for watching.